So Kristie, she's a senior food policy director for the Humane Society of the U.S. She directs the group's efforts to promote plant-based eating. And our food system is broken, so we need more people that promote the plant-based diet within an organization like the Humane Society, so that's just wonderful. She's also working on ways to help educate public schools on implementing healthier eating programs, such as MeatLess Mondays. I saw Detroit. I'm originally from that area. That's pretty cool. I'll have to talk to you later about your experiences over there. Detroit actually is, I think, number 4 now in growing vegan cities, or like whatever, per population. And her book just came out, Transform the Way You Eat, One Meal at a Time. And so before I let you, congratulations. Without further ado, Kristie Middleton.
Thank you all so much for being here. It's incredible to see and such a massive group. And please join me in giving a round of applause to Greg. So does anyone know why the tomato took a prune to the movies last night? Because he couldn't find a date.
That was terrible.
I'll keep them coming, don't worry. So, any of you grew up with older siblings?
Yes.
No? Okay, quite a few of you did. I did too. This is my sister Jennifer and me. I'm the little one holding the dog, and our dogs, Pete, Casey, and Tinkerbell. I grew up in Chesapeake, Virginia, which is on the southern part of the state. And those dogs were members of our family. We loved them, sometimes as much as we loved each other. I would dress them up in clothing. I would carry them around. This is Pete. I've lost a few pounds since this picture is taken. Dress them up in my doll's clothing. I swear they liked this. But everywhere we went, they were with us, whether we were vegging out in front of MTV, which was new at the time, or whether we were riding our bicycles around the neighborhood. We loved these dogs. I also had a neighbor who got some little ducklings one year for Easter, and I fell in love with them. They were these little downy, fluffy things that would waddle around the neighborhood. And so I was an animal lover as a little girl. One summer, my uncle Rodney came to stay with us, and he taught me how to cook. And the thing he taught me how to cook was scrambled eggs. I was fascinated watching them go from this thing inside of a shell to gooey to something I could eat within minutes of hitting the pan. One day, though, because scrambled eggs became my favorite food to eat, my older sister said to me, "You know what those are, right?" What? I had no idea what. Dead baby birds, she told me. Yeah, so as a little girl who loved animals, that news hit me. And I didn't know whether she was telling me the truth or not, but I knew one thing for sure, and that's that I didn't want to have any part in eating dead baby birds, because I was thinking about those little ducklings. So I stopped eating eggs that very day. At least I stopped eating them in scrambled eggs or fried eggs. I didn't realize they were in some of my favorite foods like cake and cookies, which, by the way, are still some of my favorite foods. But at the time, I stopped eating eggs. Call me a late learner, but it wasn't until I was in college that I became a vegetarian. And that's when a college marketing professor was describing euphemisms. And the example that she shared was meat. She said we use this tidy term, meat, to describe the flesh of dead animals. And if we called it that, then probably far fewer people would want to eat it. And she was right about that, because after that, every time I would sit down to eat, if I was eating a chicken nugget or a ham sandwich, I would think, this is not just a ham sandwich. This is the flesh of a dead pig. This is the flesh of a dead chicken. And so I became vegetarian, but I had no idea at the time the scale and the scope of suffering that animals endure to get to our plates. I just knew I didn't want to eat them. But after becoming vegetarian, I started doing a lot of research, and I learned that the real problem with eggs is that we confine egg-laying hens by the hundreds of millions in these tiny cages that are about the size of a desk drawer. 5 to 8 birds are confined in those cages. Each bird has about as much space as an iPad on which to live for about 18 months. My next door neighbor has 2 chickens, Goldie and Red. Anybody guess which one is which? So Goldie and Red come over almost every day to visit me because I put some sunflower seeds out for the squirrels and they started falling on the ground. They realized they can come over and get some grub. So they come over, they beg for food. These days they get special treats like cherry tomatoes, grapes, blueberries, and they both have different preferences. One loves grapes, the other goes crazy for tomatoes. But these 2 chickens have given me so much insight into what chickens are like, what they're supposed to be like. Once they've finished begging for food, they go back over to their yard, they take a dust bath. Chickens take dust baths to clean their feathers, so, our form of a shower. They throw dust on their backs and then shake it off, and that gets rid of bugs and restores their lipid levels to their proper levels. And then when they're done with that, they peck around the yard looking for bugs, looking for seeds. And then at the end of the day, they go into their little roost and they get on a perch and they sleep there, clutched to that perch because that makes them feel safe. And I share all of this because the picture that you saw of those hens in battery cages, you can see is nothing like what I'm describing to you. These animals are deprived of everything that's important and natural to them so that we can get cheap eggs. I also learned that the vast majority of mother pigs are confined in gestation crates. These are crates that are about 2 feet wide by 7 feet long, roughly the size of a pig's body. And these are the pigs who are used for the breeding process. So they're artificially inseminated, they're put in the crate until they give birth, then they're put into another crate until their babies are taken away from them, and then that cycle repeats itself over and over again for about 4 years, or imagine the length of a presidential term. Okay? So when I learned that, that's when I decided I was going to become vegan and that I would devote my life to helping animals. But since then, I've learned that there are so many other benefits, and that's been about 20 years now. So I learned the story of the environmental impacts of our meat-heavy diets. This is Lita Galicia now, and her cat Pumpkin. At the Humane Society, I learned the story of Lita and her neighbors. So Lita and her husband Sam met during the war. He came to the Philippines where she lived at the time, and he liberated her hometown. They fell in love and got married, and they wanted to live the American dream. So they moved back to California, and they bought a plot of land out in Lathrop, which is about 60 miles east of San Francisco in the Central Valley. And they wanted to raise their kids in true village style, so they teamed up with some other families to buy that land. And they lived a happy life for many years. There was a small egg farm down the street from their house that was later bought out by a company called Oliveira Egg Ranch. Now, probably Oliveira Egg Ranch brings to mind images of a red barn, rolling hills, chickens pecking around on the ground, like I was just describing for you. This is Oliveira Egg Ranch. Massive warehouses housing 700,000 chickens in those kinds of cages that I just showed to you. This was right down the street from Lita's house. So you see this body of water here. That's a manure lagoon. That's another problem with factory farms. What do we do with all of the manure that 700,000 animals produce? Well, Oliveira's answer, and the answer of the majority in animal agribusiness, is to put it in these lagoons, which are just giant cesspools of untreated waste. So for Lita and her neighbors, this caused a lot of problems. Sometimes the air was so thick with flies that they couldn't even open their window and enjoy fresh air. And sometimes the air was so thick with ammonia fumes that it burned their eyes, it burned their lungs, it caused them to be nauseated and sick. So they reached out to the Humane Society and we sued on their behalf. And we were able to get a settlement in court. And so some people might say, well, they won, but in the end, think about the years of quality of life that they lost, that they weren't able to enjoy their own homes because of this factory farm. And the fact that all of us are also paying the price, because that's the way that majority of factory farms are disposing of their waste. This is a pig factory farm in North Carolina. Now, I grew up in Virginia, as I mentioned, and nearly every every summer we would have some kind of tropical storm or hurricane. And the same is true for North Carolina. When these pig factory farms with their manure lagoons right outside, if there's a storm and there's flooding, where do you think that waste goes? It goes into the waterways, killing off fish, causing all kinds of untold damage to the environment, leaching into the groundwater, affecting the communities that surround those factory farms. We all probably have heard that methane is one of the leading greenhouse gas emissions, and that animal agribusiness is one of the leading contributors of human-induced greenhouse gas emissions. About 15% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from animal agriculture, according to the United Nations. And some people say that's a modest estimate. And of course, it's very resource intensive to produce meat, requiring vast amounts of land, water, fertilizer, all these other resources. Gallons of water, exactly. And so maybe instead of turning off our taps while we're brushing our teeth, or in addition to that, we could eat less or no meat, right? So I also learned about the health benefits of eating less or no meat, or eating a plant-based diet. In my work every day at the Humane Society, my team helps institutions, schools, hospitals, colleges and universities, the U.S. military, correctional facilities, anyone that's serving a lot of food. We help them with adding more plant-based options to their menus. And that's where we met Ken Chadwick. He was the food service director at American University in Washington, D.C. He had worked in food services for about 10 years, and he heard from students' requests for more vegan options during his time at George Washington University, at Georgetown, other prestigious institutions in the D.C. area. And his answer had traditionally been, we have a wonderful salad bar. How many vegans do we have in the room? Okay, a lot of you are already vegan. How many of you want to eat salad for every meal? Okay, so Ken got the picture because he kept hearing this request over and over. And when he got to American University, students were saying, we want more vegan options. So he realized that they weren't doing enough. So what he decided at a student advisory committee meeting was that he would become vegan himself so that he could see what it was like to walk in the shoes of the students who were required to eat there. That was their main source of food, was eating at the dining hall. So for his part, Ken, you can see, was unhealthy. He was 327 pounds at the beginning of this journey. He had suffered all kinds of health issues. He was on medication for high cholesterol and high blood pressure. He was in chronic pain. He said his knees ached, his ankles ached all the time. It was all he could do not to continue gaining more weight. He would go for walks, and then he built up to jogging, and said that he would just collapse at the end of his jogs after jogging 1 mile. He also had to undergo gallbladder surgery because his gallbladder was 97% inoperable. And the doctor was worried that he might die on the table because he was so unhealthy, but they had no other choice but to operate. And he also shared with me a really sad story of just how it affected him personally. He felt bad. He said that there was one day when he was getting dressed in the morning and he was just putting on his socks. And he had to lie down on his side on the bed, put it on his toe, and shimmy the sock up. And his wife came in and saw him doing this and said, "Baby, you're getting winded just putting your sock on." And reminded him that he had once been a world-class athlete and now was having difficulty putting his socks on. So as you can imagine, when Ken started this journey, he began to experience some benefits. But first, I should add that he said that one thing he would not do would be to eat from the salad bar every day, since that had been his advice to the students. So the first day, he said that he ate pears, because the students were right, they didn't have enough vegan options. So he quickly teamed up with the dining team, with the dietitians and the chefs, and ensured that if he was eating on campus, students were eating on campus, that they would have amazing vegan options for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and dessert. And they did a great job. This is Ken about a year after he began his vegan journey. He's now lost over 100 pounds. It happened so quickly that the students and his staff on campus called him the incredible shrinking man. And he said that when he went home to visit his mom for the holidays, that she thought he was sick or something. She didn't even recognize him. But of course, he felt healthier than he had in decades. Ken became such a firm believer that he created a restaurant on the American University campus that was totally vegan, named Food Forward, named after the Humane Society's program. He also initiated Meatless Monday, so every Monday on campus, the main entree options are totally plant-based. And he realizes that this goes beyond the impacts that it's having on his own personal health. He is feeding some of today's students, but tomorrow's thought leaders. About 2,000 students come through his dining hall every single day, and he's introducing them to delicious vegan food every time they come through. And he also said that it's had this impact on him, that he's much more mindful about the way he eats. And I imagine that many of you can relate to that. That you're not just putting food in your mouth, you're thinking about where it comes from, how it's produced, the impact that it's having on the planet, on workers, and all of these other things. And now he's teaching that to his students. I should also add that Ken says that these days he's still mostly vegan, 95% vegan, but he doesn't want to be dogmatic about it because he feels like he's having an influence on others. So if he's at an event and there's not much to eat, then he might have a salad that has cheese on it, or he might eat a favorite food, but that he has maintained a mostly vegan lifestyle since undergoing that experience. But there are other people who are eating less meat, and I'm here to say that that's okay. It's a good first step in the right direction. This is Anthony Williams. He's actually a member of the California Fish and Game Commission. He's not a person you would think of as eating less or no meat, right? So I met Anthony after he came to a Humane Society of the United States Gala a couple of years ago. And he had shared with us and our then California State Director, Jennifer Fearing, that he had tried going vegetarian a few times. The first time was after he saw the documentary Super Size Me. Any of you see that? Okay, so if you haven't seen it, it's a Morgan Spurlock documentary. He actually has a brand new documentary out. But this one was Morgan Spurlock ate at McDonald's every single meal for about 30 days. And he got really sick, as you can imagine. The film also showed some footage of undercover investigations on factory farms. And so after seeing that documentary, he went to his wife and he said, "Baby, we're going vegetarian." And so they did, and they stuck with it for about 9 months until they were going to visit her family in Japan. And they were worried about what it would look like for them to show up and say they don't eat certain foods. So they slowly started incorporating meat into their diets. And then once they came back home, they just stuck with that diet. A few years later, they had kids, they had a family, and they were moving from Sacramento or from Southern California up to Sacramento. They were living apart for a little bit. And his wife had the kids, and one night they watched the film Food Inc. Any of you see that one? Okay. So this time she watched that documentary and she saw more footage of factory farms and the way that our food system is so broken. So she called him up and said, "Baby, we're going vegetarian again." And they tried, and they did it for a while, but then very quickly, when things got busy, especially now having a family, they fell off the wagon. And they said once they fell off the wagon, they just stayed off because they felt like they were failing if they couldn't stick with it 100% of the time. So Anthony came to the Humane Society's Gala a couple years later, and he learned about Meatless Monday. Have any of you heard of Meatless Monday? Okay, yeah, a lot of you have. So Meatless Monday is a program that was initiated during World War I as a U.S. government conservation effort. Soldiers and Americans here were encouraged to go meat-free 1 day a week in order to conserve resources for the troops abroad, because even then, they realized that it was very resource intensive to produce meat. It was brought back during World War II for the same reasons, and then again in 2003. This time by the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health and by an organization called the Monday Campaigns, and it was brought back then as a way to fight another war, the war on chronic preventable disease. So Anthony heard about this program because my organization has worked with over 200 school districts to start Meatless Monday. And he thought, you know what, I could do that. Who couldn't go meat-free 1 day a week? And then hopefully we can add more such options to our menus throughout the week. So he got home from the gala and he presented this idea to his wife and kids. And he said, "What do you think about trying a Meatless Monday?" And it turns out that his kids go to a school that we had worked with to do Meatless Monday. So they had already heard of it, they were already doing it at school. So they decided what they would do is a meatless Monday, and then every day throughout the week, at least one of their meals, one of their 3 meals, would be meatless. And that's now been nearly 2 years, and they've stuck with it. And Anthony says that even if they do eat meat, they're eating much less of it. And that program has worked for them. And I share this because I feel like sometimes, I'm vegan, I've been vegan for 20 years. Once we become vegan, we realize, or we feel like it's so easy. Why can't everybody just do this? But the reality is it's not easy for everybody to go from eating a certain way their entire lives to switching completely. So why don't we applaud people for their progress and encourage every little step? Because for those animals, every little step, every meal that we're eating that doesn't have meat in it does make a difference. And we know that hopefully it will add up to continue to add more such meals into their repertoire. So let's talk about making that change. How many of you became vegan overnight? Okay, there are a few hands in here. So I shared this story with you about my transition. I became vegan after first not eating eggs as a little girl. And then later in college, much later, 10 years later, I became vegetarian. And then a couple years later, I became vegan. So it wasn't like a light bulb went off and I just became vegan overnight. I feel like for a lot of folks, making change, even when we know it's the right thing to do, it's not always easy. And think about when you might have dieted in the past. We know the foods that we're supposed to avoid, the foods that we're supposed to eat. We have the knowledge, but we don't always make the decisions that we know we should make. You know, when we've eaten a certain way our entire lives, our options expand, and it can be very difficult to narrow that down. And all of those decisions can feel a little overwhelming. So I have a friend who's the director of the Wright Institute of Psychology over in Berkeley, and she works on behavior change, and especially food behavior change. And she shared with me some tips that I have in my book that I would like to impart to anybody who's on this journey and trying to make the change. And one of those is just shrinking that change into smaller bite-sized pieces. Because if you've been eating your entire life a standard American diet and you try to become vegan overnight, then it might feel overwhelming and you might not stick with it. So she suggests breaking it down into bite-sized pieces, trying something like a meatless Monday, and then adding a meatless Tuesday through Friday, and then eventually maybe you'll get to 100%. Or doing something like Mark Bittman suggests. He's a New York Times columnist, former New York Times columnist, and the author of Vegan Before 6. So his recommendation is to eat at least 2/3 of your meals vegan. And then if you feel like it, eat vegan for dinner, but if you want to eat something else, then that's okay. At least 2/3 of your meals will be vegan though. So small chunks, that makes it feel a little more manageable. Another tip is to verbalize or otherwise share what your intention is. If we tell our friends or family members or somehow publicize that we are eating a certain way, we're more likely to stick with it. 42% more likely to stick with it, in fact, than if we just decide ourselves and then we don't tell anybody. Another big thing that impacts our eating habits is our community. So our food choices are very informed by our friends and our family members. How many of you have ever gone out to eat with someone, and when the server comes over and says, "Would you like dessert?" you look to the person you're sitting across from and you say, "Oh, are you going to have dessert?" So the way that our community eats has a really big influence on us. There's a Dr. Walter Willett, who is the chair of the School of Public Health at Harvard University, and he says that our community can have an influence on us. It doesn't have to be a negative influence on us. It could be a positive influence. And there was research that was published in the New England Journal of Clinical Nutrition that found that if you have a spouse who's overweight or obese, that our likelihood goes up by 30%, that we will be as well. And if we have a close friend who is, it goes up by 50%. That's how big of an influence our community has. But as Dr. Willett said, it doesn't have to be a negative influence. We can rally the herd and get our friends and family to join us on this journey. And not only will it make it more likely that we'll stick with it, but also our impact on the planet, on animals, our own health will be multiplied. Your friends' health will be multiplied. So if you're trying to go meatless on Monday, for example, ask your family to join you. Maybe make that the night that you all eat together. Or encourage your coworkers to participate and do a Meatless Monday potluck at work every single week. Join a meetup group if your friends and family won't do it with you, because it can feel lonely and it can feel overwhelming if you're trying to go it alone. That's a good way to build community, and also you're supporting others. You can share what your favorite new restaurants are, or favorite new recipes, or just have someone to run questions that you might encounter by. Another tip is to make it easy. So I love snacks. Who doesn't love snacks, right? If I have them in my house, I will eat them. So if I want chips or something that I shouldn't be eating, and I don't want to sound like I'm a health nut because I'm not, but if they're there, I will definitely binge on them. Or those cakes that I talked about. I might go out and get a slice of cake, but if I have it in my refrigerator, I'll eat the entire thing. So a tip is to make it easy to eat the things that you're trying to eat, and make it difficult to get to the things that you're trying to avoid. So if you want to eat healthier, you want to eat vegan food, put it in your refrigerator, put it at eye level, and put it in clear containers. So that's the sort of thing that's easy to see and accessible. Make sure you have lots of healthy food accessible on your counter. Wash it when you come home from the grocery store or the farmer's market. So when you're having a hankering for a snack, those are the things that you will reach for, because they're easy, they're right there, they're prepared, and they're ready to go. And I will just wrap up my talk by saying that there are very few things that we all do every single day, 3 times a day, if we're lucky, if we have the time, if we have the financial resources, if we have the access. We eat 3 times a day, and every time we're making a decision about what to eat, we are potentially having an impact on not just our health, but on the planet, on animals, on workers. There's this quote, this is the non-Spider-Man version of it, great power involves great responsibility. Every time we're eating, we're using a lot of power. And it's a responsibility that all of us should take very seriously. Our forks and knives are incredibly powerful tools, so I hope that all of you will use them for good. Thank you very much. So we have about 20 minutes or so for questions, and I also have books, and we'll be at a little table outside selling a few books afterward. This is my surrogate mom for today. And what's your name, Mom?
Wendy.
Wendy.
Yes. So my husband and I are vegan. The question, the comment that I most frequently get from people, and maybe others here get this comment as well, is how can, there's a few, but two of them is one, how can you live with so little protein, or how do you get your protein? And the other one is, and you know you don't get any B12 if you're a vegan. You can't get any B12 unless you take a supplement. So do you have kind of standard answers to those 2 things?
Yeah, those are great questions, and I'm guessing that probably anybody who's vegan has encountered those. I think that most people don't have any idea how much protein we're supposed to be getting. We're just obsessed with it. Exactly. Very few of us. People who are not eating vegan, they're obsessed with that. For some reason, that's the thing that that's top of mind for everyone. So 45 grams for women, 65 grams for men. We can easily get that much. And Michael Greger actually says that even vegans, Dr. Michael Greger, by the way, is a friend, co-worker at the Humane Society and the Director of Public Health. He's also the author of How Not to Die, which is a New York Times best-selling book. And he has a website, nutritionfacts.org. So very prolific on this topic. And he also says that we're getting about twice as much. We vegans are getting about twice as much protein as we need. So we're over-consuming protein. And in a lot of instances, when we're over-consuming protein, that means we're also over-consuming saturated fat and cholesterol, things that are causing some of our worst chronic preventable diseases. And with respect to B12, I do take a B12 supplement, and most dietitians who I know who are specializing in vegan nutrition recommend that you do take a B12 supplement. Sublingual is the best way to absorb it, and very inexpensive to do that. You can also eat foods that are fortified with it, but nutritional yeast, but not all nutritional yeast is fortified, so you want to make sure that the ones that you're eating are fortified with it. And then I've even seen B12 fortified toothpaste, so there's all kinds of ways that you can get it, but I do recommend, as do other that I'm a dietitian. Dietitians and physicians who are specializing in vegan nutrition. Thanks for the question. We have a question over here. What's your name?
D, at least two.
All right.
First question sounds corny and cookie cutter, but what inspired you to write the book MeatLess?
That's actually not a corny question. Very good question. So I've been doing this work for a long time, and when I first became vegan, I couldn't believe that I didn't know what was happening on factory farms. I was much more dogmatic. The whole world needs to be vegan right now, right? Who hasn't felt like that? And I realized that I wasn't really giving people permission to do what I had done, which was to do it gradually and to eat less meat. So when I work for the Humane Society, I work with institutions. And if I were to go in and say, go vegan, they would say, you're crazy, get out of here. Like, make your dining hall vegan. But I can say, eat less or serve less meat. And most people are receptive to that message. So this book was really inspired by that work, by going and working with institutions that said, no, Meatless Monday, we can do that. Los Angeles Unified School District, for example, I worked with them. They're the second largest school district in the country, and they serve 700,000 meals a day. That means 700,000 vegetarian meals being served on Monday. So I wanted to offer people some kind of resource that gave them the permission to do a little bit that would then build up, hopefully. But even if they just do one meatless day per week, it would definitely make a difference.
And the one last question, and I'll shut the hell up. B12, regarding B12, which is the best way to get it? As a shot or as a capsule?
Good question. I'm not a dietitian. I would say if you can get a shot, that way you don't have to think about it, and that might be easier. But I think you can get all you need from taking the sublingual little capsules.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you for the questions. Right up front. What's your name?
My name is Jan. If you're in the institutional work that you work with, one of the things that I've been getting exposed to is whole foods plant-based.
Right.
So to take that extra sort of, going more with the natural food, trying to get least refined, least
Right.
processed. Is that part of the efforts with the institutional approaches with, in your work? Or is it just to try to go, plant-based?
Well, I will tell you, most of the institutions that we work with are not using a lot of the processed or plant-based meats because they tend to be a little more expensive, and plate cost is one of the biggest obstacles. We're talking about institutions that might have $1.25 to create all of the components for a meal. But our approach is not that you have to go 100% whole foods plant-based, because I want to make sure that the food tastes good. And if we have chefs who are in the kitchen who are making food and they don't have the training or the skills to make whole foods plant-based taste good, then we want to give them the opportunity to ease into it. So one of the things that we do actually is we do culinary training. We have 3 chefs on our team now who came from institutions. 2 of them are from college and university food services. One of them opened the nation's first totally vegan dining hall in Denton, Texas. Vegan dining hall, first one in the nation, was in Texas, exactly. And the other was at a small college in upstate New York called Canisius College. So they have the background in institutional food service. And so they're easing people into it, but we don't say it has to be whole foods plant-based. We just say, like, whatever you can get on your menus is a good start, and then maybe we can work with them to offer healthier options later.
In other words, no big pallets full of Beyond Meat.
Right.
Or Gardein, or...
Yeah, I mean, some of them, to be honest, do use those, but I would say most of them are not, because it's not really that affordable.
Right. Rather just go to the tofu and the tempeh themselves.
Yes, exactly. And even at UNT, because their plate cost was so low, they didn't even do tofu or tempeh. They were using lots of beans and legumes. And interesting, and maybe this would be something for all of you to try. So the chef there actually found that steel-cut oats, so if you just cook them till they're al dente, that you could use those as, instead of a crumble, like a meatless crumble or beef in chili, or in chili pie, which was one of their most popular dishes there at UNT. So you just cook it, and then you add it, and it has that toothsome texture of meat. And we know that other foods, it doesn't just have to be beans and legumes or meat, have protein, so steel-cut oats even has some protein.
That's where I get my 45 grams every morning.
There you go, exactly. Carly, what's your name?
Jacob,
Hey, Jacob.
are you misleading a little bit by just focusing on meatless as opposed to animal-less?
How do you mean?
I mean, fish. I mean,
Yeah.
many people say, I don't eat meat, but I eat chicken, and I'll
Right.
eat fish, and I'll eat pigs, or I'll eat, but the whole issue with respect to meatless also refers to animals, any
Yeah.
animal products.
Yeah, I'm with you, and in the book I definitely have a whole chapter on, or a whole section on fish, aquaculture, as well as wild caught fish and the implications on the environment. So when we work with institutions and they ask us, what does meatless mean? Can we serve fish? We say, no, that's not plant-based. So we definitely do address that issue. It's just a catchy title. Yeah.
Is it because of Meatless Mondays? Is that, do you
Yeah,
think
it's-
it evolved from that?
It's a play on words. It's meatless as in meatless Monday, and also meatless.
Right. Yes.
Hi, what's your name?
My name is I.
Hi.
I'm a personal trainer, and I'm not being here with you, but I'm just here tonight.
Excellent.
And I think my concern is that like personal trainers are always trying to add more protein. Obviously, you say that women only need like 35 grams, and they might need like over 100 grams, and they're trying to like have less carbs. Like, do you come across anybody, who's vegan and who's very successful with building tons of muscle?
Oh, sure, yeah, there actually is this whole new movement of people that are vegan athletes. So whether it's Scott Jurek, who's a vegan ultra marathoner, he's not trying to gain a lot of muscle, he's trying to run fast. He's participating in all these races. There's also David Carter, who is known as the 300-pound vegan. He was on the Oakland Raiders, the Chicago Bears, and he's this massive guy who's a NFL linebacker. There's actually a film that's going to be coming out sometime in the next year and a half or so called Game Changers, which is about vegan athletes. So they're constant. I feel like just every other week it seems like there are more NFL players that are advocating a more plant-based diet. There are some Washington Redskins that saw this own What the Health that are eating vegan. And then also I just heard recently about some basketball players who are eating vegan. So there's a big movement. I think you can just look up vegan athletes and find a laundry list of many of them. What David Carter found, and I actually mentioned him, have a section about him in my book, is that he became vegan because his wife was vegan. And it was his Valentine's Day present to her. And he had been struggling with a lot of nagging injuries. He was only 25 years old at the time, and was already suffering from tendinitis, all kinds of joint pains, and took a long time to heal from his injuries. But after becoming vegan, he was able to get a lot of lean muscle. So he was still big, but he was lean and has a six-pack, which I think is unusual for linebackers. They're usually just these massive hulking beasts. But also, he was able to get rid of those injuries. His tendinitis went away, his joint pain went away, and he was actually able to recover quicker after games and run faster. So a lot of people couldn't believe how quick this 300-pound guy was able to run. Good question. Thank you. Do we have any others? One back there. What's your name?
My name is Shirley, and you have those cute dogs. Have you ever considered those going vegan also?
Yes, those dogs unfortunately have not been around for a very long time, but I do have a dog now named Calvin, and he eats a vegan diet. He eats not Ani, that's my cat, but Ani, and I can address that for you too. He eats V-Dog most of the time, sometimes Natural Balance, and then every once in a while I make food for him just to give a variety, and then we'll add that to it. So this morning, actually, in the pressure cooker, which is a miracle piece of equipment if you all don't have one, I made a mixture of rice, lentils, some of those mixed vegetables, and added some flaxseed to it, and put it in the pressure cooker. Well, I did add the flax afterward. Put it in the pressure cooker for like 20 minutes, and then he had some really delicious food to go with his V-Dog kibble. And with respect to cats, my cats are not vegan, but they eat vegan kibble, and then I give them a little bit of meat food from a can. So I just feel like even for the cats, I can serve them less meat, and they're still able to get all of their nutrients and the moisture that they need in their diet, but they're eating some vegan food.
I was going to ask about that just to get people time to the kitties.
Okay.
And you went ahead and answered the question anyways, because they are obligate carnivores.
Right, yeah.
Right? So we would make them sick to put them on a
Yes, they're not on a completely vegan diet.
But where can one find information on getting them onto a partially plant-based diet?
There used to be a website called Vegan Cats and Dogs. I don't know if it's still around.
Okay. I
Yeah.
hadn't thought about their kibble being.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so if you feed them
Because they do
kibble-
eat some plant. I mean, some of the commercial cat foods have vegetables in them. so
Yeah,
it's-
exactly. And I get mine from veganessentials.com.
Okay.
There's a couple different spots right here
Oh,
inside
here,
the show.
they have some pet
We have
tables?
there's some dog and cat animal stuff there. Maybe one of the books will have that information.
Thank you. I thought I checked all of them. It was busy.
There's a lot to see in the room.
Yes.
Okay.
So one other thing I was going to throw in is that if people, I don't know if you're into microbiome at all, but we happened to see a presentation by two researchers from Stanford that only investigate the microbiome, which is what's inside your intestines. And it is basically what keeps you alive or doesn't keep you alive. They strictly believe in, I mean, they have become very vegan oriented because of their investigation of microbiome. They show you a blow up of their photograph. This is this micro thing, and they blow it up big. It's beautifully colored in somebody who is eating a nice variety of vegan food. They have holes. They have little holes in their system when they eat animals and so forth. And you can see it. It's kind of crazy. But they're doing the research on it. So if anybody's interested, look it up on the internet. Do your own research. Microbiome, M-I-C-B-I-O-M-E is the last one.
It's a major deal.
It's a-
It's a very
Major
important thing, yeah.
Fascinating. So many
The
benefits
health
to
of
eating
our
a plant-based
intestinal
diet.
tract.
And you won't get sick.
Good bacteria versus bad bacteria, and how we colonize our GI tract.
Thank you.